In the year 1900, in a small insurance office in Philadelphia, a seemingly invisible woman sat behind a wooden desk watching people come and go. Her name was Emily, and she was 42 years old. To everyone around her, she was just the receptionist, the woman who booked appointments and poured tea. But in the next 2 weeks, she would face a choice that would force her to break every rule of her society, confront a dangerous conspiracy, save 2 lives, and discover a terrible secret about herself that she never knew existed. This is the story of how one ordinary woman became extraordinary by refusing to stay silent.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The morning of October 15, 1900, began like every other morning at Hartwell and Associates Insurance, the small but respected insurance company on Walnut Street in Philadelphia. Emily arrived at 8:15 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before the office opened to the public, as she had done for 5 years without missing a single day. She wore the same type of dress she always wore, a dark navy wool dress with a high collar and long sleeves, buttoned to the wrist. A small hat, pinned carefully to her graying hair with a pearl-headed pin. Her shoes, which she polished every Sunday night, made a soft clicking sound on the marble floor as she walked from the entrance to her desk. The reception room was her domain, a simple space with pale yellow walls, a few landscape paintings of the American countryside, and 3 uncomfortable wooden chairs with thin green cushions for visitors. Her desk was large and made of mahogany, with 3 drawers on each side, all precisely organized. A leather-bound appointment book sat in the center, along with a pen holder made of brass, 2 pens, a small glass of water, and nothing else. Emily believed that a tidy desk reflected a tidy mind, and a tidy mind was essential for a woman in her position to maintain respect in a male-dominated office. She began her morning routine. First, she checked the appointment book for the day's schedule, running her finger down each entry, confirming mentally that all the information was correct. Then she watered the 2 plants that sat on small tables by the windows, geraniums, because they required little attention and bloomed consistently, much like Emily herself. She adjusted the curtains to let in just enough morning light without letting the sun fade the paintings on the wall. Finally, she prepared the waiting room, ensuring that the 3 chairs were positioned at exactly the same angle, that the small table between them held the latest issues of the Saturday Evening Post and the Century magazine, and that a small vase with fresh flowers was in place. Emily moved through these tasks with the precision of someone who had performed them thousands of times. Each gesture was economical, each movement deliberate. She made no wasted motions, she made no unnecessary sounds. She was in every way the ideal receptionist for the year 1900, competent, discreet, and completely invisible. At 8:30 a.m., her boss, Mr. Hartwell, arrived. He was a large man with impressive side whiskers and a gold watch chain that draped across his substantial belly. He never acknowledged Emily's presence as he passed her desk, though he did nod occasionally, a gesture so small that it barely qualified as recognition. Behind him came 2 other men, the insurance agents, Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan. They too passed without greeting. This was normal. This was expected. Women who worked in offices were not meant to be seen as fully human. They were meant to be seen as extensions of the office itself, like the furniture or the gas lamps. At 9 a.m., the office officially opened. Emily placed the leather-bound appointment book in front of her and waited. The first visitor of the day was Mrs. Patterson, a widow who came to adjust her life insurance policy. Emily greeted her with a warm but professional smile, asked her to have a seat, and then walked to Mr. Foster's office to announce the visitor. She returned to her desk and waited for the next appointment. And so the rhythm of the day continued. Visitors arriving, Emily greeting them, directing them to the appropriate office, and then returning to her desk to wait for the next person. To any observer, Emily's day would have seemed utterly unremarkable. But to Emily, The day was filled with subtle observations that never made it into any report, never appeared in any conversation, and never influenced her professional demeanor. As she watched each person enter, she noted their physical state, the way they moved, the condition of their clothing, the expression in their eyes. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people in the moments before they composed themselves. By noon, she had already noticed several things. Mrs. Patterson widow's weeds were 3 years old. You could tell by the style of the trim, which meant her husband had died long enough ago that she should have moved into half mourning, yet she was still in full black. This could either mean financial struggle, unable to afford new clothes, or emotional struggle, unable to let go of her grief. Mr. Foster was drinking more coffee than usual, and his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking. Mr. Brennan had a cut on his neck from shaving, suggesting either anxiety that morning or carelessness. Emily suspected anxiety. These observations meant nothing to anyone but Emily. She never shared them, she never acted on them. To do so would be to overstep her position in a profound way. A woman who worked in an office was permitted to perform her duties with excellence, but she was absolutely not permitted to think deeply about matters that were not her concern. Yet Emily could not help but think. Her mind, despite her best efforts to keep it focused on appointment books and tea service, kept working, observing, wondering about the stories behind the faces that passed through the reception room. This had been the nature of her life for 5 years, and before that, for the 12 years of her marriage. Emily had learned early that observation without action was a necessary skill for a woman trying to survive in a world that was not constructed for her survival. The afternoon passed. Emily prepared tea at 2 p.m., as she always did, brewing it in the small kettle kept on a hot plate beside her desk. She offered tea to the visitors, setting out the cups with their matching saucers, the small silver spoon, the sugar bowl. Most people declined, but some accepted, and in those moments Emily would observe the relief that crossed their faces, the simple comfort of someone offering them something warm. At 5 p.m., as the sun began to descend and the office prepared for closing, Emily began her end-of-day routine. She reviewed the appointment book one final time, making small notes about any appointments that needed to be confirmed for the following day. She organized the desk, placing everything back in its precise position. She watered the plants one final time, using exactly the amount of water that would keep them alive without overwhelming them. By 5:30 p.m., the office was closed. The other employees had left. Emily was always the last to go. As she walked home through the streets of Philadelphia, Emily thought about nothing in particular, or rather she thought about everything, the people she had seen that day, the stories she imagined behind their lives, the small observations she had made. But she thought about these things in the manner of someone thinking about clouds passing in the sky, with interest but without attachment, acknowledging them and letting them drift away. She lived alone in a small apartment on Spruce Street, 3 rooms that she kept immaculate. She had one servant, a young Irish woman named Bridget, who came twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning. Her son, Thomas, who was now 20 years old and working as a carpenter, lived elsewhere with his own lodgings. Emily had encouraged this arrangement, believing that a young man needed to establish himself independently, and that a mother should not be a burden on his son's future. Thomas visited on Sunday afternoons, and they had tea together, and they talked about his work and his health, and their conversations were pleasant and proper, and revealed very little of what either of them actually felt. This was the life Emily had constructed for herself over the past 15 years, a life of careful observation, complete discretion, emotional silence, and perfect routine. It was a life that asked nothing of her except competence, and it was a life that gave her exactly nothing except a paycheck and the security of knowing that she was not causing trouble for anyone. On the evening of October 15th, 1900, Emily sat in her small apartment, in the chair by the window that overlooked Spruce Street, and she read from a novel, a safe novel, a proper novel, about a country girl who learned to be a governess. She had read it before, She found comfort in knowing exactly what would happen, in knowing that there were no surprises, no disruptions, no demands that she exceed the carefully drawn boundaries of her life. She did not know that her life was about to change completely. She did not know that the next morning would bring a man whose life was balanced on a knife's edge, whose desperation would crack through the carefully constructed walls of her composure. She did not know that 2 days after that, a young woman would sit in one of those uncomfortable green chairs and would not tell anyone, but would communicate through silence and bruises and the particular emptiness of someone who has decided to leave, that everything Emily believed about staying quiet was about to be tested. Emily finished her chapter, closed her book, prepared for bed, and slept the sound sleep of someone whose conscience was clear because she had taken no action that would burden it.
The morning of October 16th started like every other morning. Emily arrived at 8:15 a.m. She watered the geraniums, she adjusted the chairs, she arranged the magazines. But something in the air felt different that day. Not that Emily could articulate exactly what it was. It was simply a sense, a tightness in the office that had not been there before. Mr. Hartwell was irritable, snapping at his secretary about a misplaced file. Mr. Foster seemed distracted, staring at the wall instead of reading his morning correspondence. Mr. Brennan had not arrived yet, which was unusual because he was always punctual. At 10:30 a.m., the first visitor of the day arrived. His name is David Stratton, and he was a man Emily recognized, not personally but by reputation. He was one of the wealthiest businessmen in Philadelphia, owner of Stratton Textile Mills, an enterprise that employed hundreds of people and had made him one of the most respected figures in the commercial world. Emily knew this not because anyone had told her, but because the business pages of the Philadelphia Inquirer, which she read carefully each morning, had mentioned him several times. But the man who walked through the door on this morning did not look like someone who was wealthy or respected. He looked like someone who was drowning. David Stratton was a tall man, perhaps 6 feet, with a strong frame that must have been even more impressive before his current illness, for he was clearly ill, though not with a disease that showed itself in fever or visible symptoms. His suit, which was undoubtedly expensive, hung on him as though it belonged to someone else. His face was gray, not the gray that comes from age, but the gray that comes from a person whose blood has stopped flowing properly through his veins because his heart has forgotten how to beat normally. His eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting either illness or sleeplessness, or both. He moved toward the reception desk, and Emily noticed that his hand, when he reached for the edge to steady himself, trembled almost imperceptibly. Most people would not have noticed. Most people would have seen a businessman arriving for an appointment and would have processed nothing else. But Emily noticed everything. "Good morning," Emily said in her professional voice. "Do you have an appointment?" David looked at her for a moment, and in that moment, Emily saw something shift in his face. For just a fraction of a second, it was as though he was truly seeing her, not as the receptionist, not as a piece of the office furniture, but as a person. And then the moment passed, and he composed himself. "I do," he said. 10:30, with Mr. Foster. Emily checked the appointment book. Yes, there it was. D. Stratton, 10:30. She made a note in the small pad beside the book, then rose and walked to Mr. Foster's office. She knocked, entered, and announced, "Mr. Stratton is here to see you, sir." Mr. Foster's face changed. Not in the way that Mr. Foster usually changed his face when a client arrived, with professional warmth, but in a way that suggested alarm, quickly concealed. "Thank you," he said. "Please send him in." Emily returned to the reception room. "Mr. Foster is ready for you, sir." Mr. Stratton stood and moved toward the office. But before he entered, he paused. He turned back to look at Emily, and he said something that no client had ever said to Emily in the 5 years she had worked there. "What is your name?" Emily was momentarily confused by the question. "Emily, sir." "That's a good name." And then he entered Mr. Foster's office, and the door closed behind him. Emily sat at her desk, uncertain why this small exchange had disturbed her so much. She tried to return to her work, but her mind kept returning to the way he had looked at her, the way he had asked her name. It was as though in that moment he had been searching for something human, something real, and she had been the first truly human thing he had encountered in a very long time. The meeting with Mr. Foster lasted 37 minutes. Emily knew this because she was in the habit of noting the duration of meetings just as she noted everything else. When David Stratton emerged from Mr. Foster's office, his appearance had not changed, but something about his bearing seemed different. He looked slightly relieved, as though some small weight had been lifted, though his overall condition was still clearly one of deep distress. He approached the reception desk, and Emily saw that his hand was shaking again. "I will need to return tomorrow morning to bring additional documentation." Emily made a note in the appointment book. "Of course, sir. What time would be convenient?" 9. Early, before the rest of the office fills with people. She wrote this down. Again, there was something unusual about this request, but she only said, "I will ensure that Mr. Foster is informed, sir." David Stratton departed, and Emily watched him go, moving slowly down the street toward his carriage, which was waiting for him. She noticed that his driver looked concerned, helping him into the carriage with more solicitousness than was usually displayed toward a passenger. After he left, Emily sat at her desk, and she made a decision that she would later recognize as the first step on a path that would transform her life. She did something that she had never done before. She opened one of the newspapers that was kept in the waiting room, the Philadelphia Inquirer from that morning, and she turned to the business pages and she searched for any mention of Stratton Textile Mills. There had been an article, small enough that it might have been missed by most readers, announcing that there was some question about the financial stability of Stratton Textile Mills. There had been an accusation of accounting irregularities, the article said. An investigation was underway. No conclusion had yet been reached, but there were suggestions that the situation was serious. Emily read this article 3 times, and she folded the newspaper and placed it back in the waiting room exactly as it had been before. She returned to her desk and continued with her work as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. She had begun to connect the dots between the man's appearance and the news article. She had begun to understand that the trembling in David Stratton's hands was not the trembling of illness, but the trembling of a man whose entire world was collapsing.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The day after David Stratton's visit, Emily arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m., as always. But this morning, she had something on her mind in a way that was completely foreign to her normal state of emotional detachment. She found herself watching the clock, noting that it was 8:45 a.m., then 8:55 a.m., then 9 a.m. exactly. At 9:05 a.m., David Stratton arrived. This morning, he looked, if possible, even worse than he had the day before. His suit was the same suit, but his face bore the appearance of a man who had not slept, and his eyes had a particular quality of resignation that Emily recognized. She had seen this quality once before in her life, in the mirror, 15 years ago, after her husband had died. She greeted him with the same professionalism she always used, but something in her voice must have been different because David paused, and he looked at her directly. "You noticed," he said. It was not a question. Emily should have said nothing. She should have maintained her professional distance. She should have simply directed him to Mr. Foster's office. Instead, she said, "I read the newspaper." For a moment, David Stratton's face crumpled slightly, as though the effort of maintaining his composure had become too great. But then he regained control of himself. "I should not have said your name yesterday," he said. "I should not have made you see me as a person. It is unfair to burden you with that knowledge." "You are already a person, sir," Emily said, and then immediately regretted speaking because it was so far beyond the boundaries of her position that she could barely believe the words had come out of her mouth. David looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, I suppose I am. And that is the problem, isn't it? I am a person, and I have a family, and I have responsibilities,
and I have made such terrible mistakes that I cannot imagine how to fix them." Emily should have ended this conversation. She should have stood and walked away. Instead, she found herself making a decision that she would never have imagined herself making. She stood, walked to the coffee station, prepared 2 cups of coffee, and returned to her desk. She had never invited a client to sit in the reception room before. But now she gestured to the green chair nearest to her desk and said, "Please sit, sir. We have a few minutes before Mr. Foster arrives." David Stratton sat. And then, in a voice so quiet that Emily had to lean forward to hear him, he told her a story. The story was this. His textile mills had been his life's work. He had built them from nothing, starting with 2 looms and his own hands. Over 30 years, through intelligence and hard work, he had grown the business into one of the most respected textile operations in Pennsylvania. He employed over 400 people. He was respected in his industry. He was respected in society. He had a wife, a good woman, Margaret, whom he had been married to for 28 years. He had 2 sons, both of whom were being prepared to take over the business. His life was, by any measure, a success. But 6 months ago, his accountant, a man he had trusted for 15 years, had come to him with a problem. There had been some irregularities in the books. Some money was missing. Not a huge amount, perhaps, but enough that it needed to be investigated. David had asked, with the assumption that it was a simple mistake, how much money. The accountant had told him $20,000. $20,000, David explained to Emily, was an enormous sum. It was enough to destroy the company if it were reported. Because if the investors discovered that the books had been falsified, if they discovered that money was missing, they would lose confidence in the enterprise. The whole thing would collapse like a house of cards. David had immediately assumed that his accountant, the man named Williams, had stolen the money. But when he confronted Williams, the man had denied it. Instead, Williams had told David something far worse. The money had not been stolen by a single person. It had been stolen by multiple people. And those people, Williams said, included Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan, the insurance agents who worked in the very office where Emily was sitting. "What?" Emily said, the word escaping her before she could stop it. "Yes," David said. "Apparently, for the past 3 years, they have been embezzling from the company. Small amounts, regular amounts, careful amounts, enough that it was hard to detect, but enough that over time it added up to $20,000. "How is this possible?" Emily asked. "They are insurance agents." "That is exactly what I asked," David said. "The answer is that they are insurance agents because that gives them access to me. This office is my insurance office. They were placed here, I believe, specifically to gain my trust and to learn the details of my business so that they could facilitate the theft." Emily sat back in her chair trying to process this information. "What did he do?" she asked. "I told them that I knew about the theft. I told them that I had discovered the missing money, and I told them that I was going to report it to the police and to the investors." "And," Emily asked, "and they told me that if I did so, they would make sure that the missing money was never traced back to them. It would be traced back to me. They said that they had evidence, falsified evidence, that would show that I had stolen the money from my own company. They said that if I reported them, they would report me, and that my word, the word of a businessman with a questionable financial situation, would be considered less reliable than theirs, particularly since they could produce documentation that they claimed proved my guilt." "That is extortion," Emily said. "Yes, it is extortion, and it is brilliant in a terrible way because they have me completely trapped. If I report them, they destroy me and my family. If I don't report them, I am complicit in their crime, and I am allowing them to continue stealing from my company." "There must be something you can do," Emily said. "There is. That is why I'm here this morning. I have decided to do something that may destroy my life, but which is the only action I can take that aligns with any moral principle I possess. I am going to confess to everything. I am going to tell my wife, and then I am going to go to the police. I am going to tell them the entire story, the embezzlement, the extortion, everything. If the evidence they have is false, then that can be proved. And if it cannot be proved, then I will face the consequences of my association with this crime, and at least I will not be complicit in allowing it to continue." Emily sat in silence for a long moment. "When?" she asked. After I leave this office, I'm going to go home, I'm going to tell my wife, and then I'm going to go to the police." "What about Mr. Foster?" Emily asked. "Won't he try to stop you?" "I don't think he has any way to stop me, unless he does something drastic. But I don't think these men are the type to resort to violence. They are the type to resort to lies and manipulation. Those are the only weapons they have." At that moment, the office door opened, and Mr. Foster walked past the reception desk toward this office. As he passed, he seemed to notice something unusual, perhaps the fact that Emily and David were sitting very close together, speaking in low voices, or perhaps he simply noticed the expression on David's face. He paused for a moment, studying David carefully. Then he continued on to his office and closed the door. Emily and David exchanged a look, and without speaking, they both seemed to understand that something had shifted. The conspiracy, if that was what it was, had been exposed, at least to the people involved. "I should go," David said, standing. "I have done what I came to do, confess to one person before I confess to everyone. It seems important to do that, to have someone know the truth before the lies take over." "I hope that things work out for you," Emily said. "I don't think so," David said. "I think my life is about to become very difficult. But at least it will be my life, lived according to my principles, rather than a life shaped by the blackmail of men without principles." He extended his hand, and Emily shook it. His hand was warm and firm, and for a moment they held the handshake longer than was strictly necessary. Then David Stratton walked out of the office, and Emily never saw him again. But the day was far from over.
At 2:15 p.m. on that same day, a young woman entered the reception room. She was perhaps 25 years old, though she had the bearing of someone much older. She wore a dark green dress, expensively made but somewhat worn, and a hat with a feather that had once been fashionable but was now slightly broken. She approached the reception desk and asked if she could wait in the reception room for a few minutes. She had an appointment at 3 o'clock, but she was early. "Of course," Emily said. "Please have a seat." The young woman sat in one of the green chairs and picked up a magazine without looking at it. Emily went back to her work, but something about this visitor had caught her attention. It was not immediately obvious why. The woman was not being disruptive, was not causing any problem, but there was something about her presence that suggested a kind of brittle quality, as though she was holding herself together through pure force of will. Emily observed her carefully. The woman's hands, folded in her lap, were shaking slightly. Her eyes, when they glanced up from the magazine, had a particular quality of emptiness that Emily recognized. And then Emily noticed something else. On the woman's left wrist, visible where her glove had slipped slightly, there was a bruise. Not the kind of bruise you get from an accident, but the kind of bruise you get when someone grabs your wrist with enough force to damage the delicate skin. Emily's heart rate increased in a way that was physical and undeniable. She had seen bruises like that before, on her own wrists, 15 years ago, when her husband was alive. The woman noticed Emily looking and quickly pulled her glove back into place. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't mean to. I'm just a bit clumsy." Emily recognized the lie immediately because she had told that same lie many times. She had said to friends and family and servants that she had hit her arm on a door, that she had fallen on the stairs, that she had caught her hand in the window latch, and the people around her had accepted these lies because they were comfortable accepting them, because to acknowledge the truth would be to acknowledge that something terrible was happening, and most people are not willing to do that. Emily should have said nothing. She should have simply let the woman sit there until her appointment time and then sent her on to whatever office her meeting was in. But something had shifted inside Emily. Perhaps it was the meeting with David Stratton, which had shown her what happened when someone spoke the truth. Or perhaps it was simply that she could no longer bear to see someone suffering in the way that she herself had suffered. "Would you like some tea?" Emily asked. The woman looked surprised. "That's very kind," she said, "but I'm all right." "I insist," Emily said, and she got up and prepared a cup of tea. She brought it back and set it in front of the woman. Then she did something that she had never done before. She sat down in the chair next to the woman on the other side of the small table that held the magazines.
My name is Emily, and I want to tell you that you don't have to lie to me about those bruises." The woman's face went white. She looked down at her wrist as if seeing the bruises for the first time. Then she looked up at Emily, and her eyes filled with tears. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Because I have been there," Emily said. "I wore the same gloves to hide the same bruises. I told the same lies. I felt the same way you are feeling right now." The woman set down her teacup with shaking hands. For a moment she sat in complete silence. Then she said, "I want to die." Emily felt something crack inside her chest. She had thought the words herself many times, but she had never heard them spoken aloud by another person. The reality of those words, spoken in a small voice by a young woman in a green dress, was far more powerful than any private thought could be. "I know," Emily said quietly. "What is your name?" "Margaret," the woman said. "Margaret Whitmore." "How long?" "How long what?" "How long has he been hurting you?" Margaret looked down at her hands. 7 months, she said. "We've been married for 7 months. He seemed so nice before we married. My family said it was a good match. He was a respectable man with a respectable business. But after the wedding," she trailed off. "What happened after the wedding?" Emily asked, though she already knew it. She had lived through the same transformation, though her husband had been kinder about it, or perhaps simply less motivated by cruelty. "He changed. He said I was too stupid to manage a household properly. He said I was too slow, too clumsy, too fat, too ugly. And when I didn't respond the way he wanted, when I cried or tried to defend myself, he would grab me. He would hurt me. And he would tell me that it was my fault, that I had made him do it, that if I were a better wife, he wouldn't have to teach me lessons." Emily reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. It was a gesture that went far beyond the boundaries of propriety, and she knew it, but she did it anyway. "You can leave," she said. Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I can't leave. Where would I go? My family has made it very clear that they will not take me back. They said that I made my bed and I have to lie in it, and the law says that I belong to my husband. I don't have any money of my own. I don't have any legal rights. If I tried to leave, he would find me and he would drag me back, and it would only be worse." "There must be something," Emily said. "There isn't," Margaret said. And then in a voice so quiet that Emily almost couldn't hear it, she added, "I came here today to ask the insurance agent if I could take out a life insurance policy. Not for someone else, for me. I was planning to—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Emily understood. Emily's hand tightened on Margaret's. "Don't," she said. "Please don't." "Why not?" Margaret asked, and the question was asked with genuine curiosity, as though Margaret truly could not understand why continuing to live would be preferable to the alternative. "What do I have to live for? What is there in my life except pain and humiliation and fear?" Emily sat back, and she realized that she did not have a good answer to this question. What did Margaret have to live for? By the standards of the world in 1900, Margaret had nothing. She was a woman in a legal and social situation with no escape routes. She was trapped, in the way that many women were trapped, by laws written by men, by customs enforced by society, by the simple biological fact that she could not survive on her own in a world that was not designed to allow women to survive independently. But Emily also knew something else. She knew that there was a difference between recognizing that a situation was hopeless and actually surrendering to that hopelessness. She knew that even in the most constrained circumstances, there might be a way forward, if one could find it. "Give me 3 days," Emily said. "I don't know what I can do or how I can help, but I'm asking you to give me 3 days. Don't do anything for 3 days. Can you do that?" Margaret looked at Emily, and something in her expression shifted slightly. It was as though, in this moment, someone had simply asked her to stay alive without demanding anything else of her, without requiring her to be brave or strong or to have a plan. Someone had simply asked her to wait. "All right," Margaret said. 3 days.
Emily left the office that evening in a state of profound disturbance. She had, in the course of a single day, become privy to two extraordinary secrets. The first was that the men she worked for, Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan, were criminals engaged in organized embezzlement and extortion. The second was that a young woman she had never met before this afternoon had come to the office with the intention of ending her life, and Emily had somehow convinced her not to, at least for the next 72 hours. The question now was, what was she supposed to do with this knowledge? When Emily arrived at her apartment, she sat in her usual chair by the window, but she did not read her novel. Instead, she stared out at the street below and tried to think. The situation with David Stratton was complicated but relatively clear. He was going to turn himself in to the authorities and confess everything. That situation would be resolved through the legal system. Emily had no role to play in it, and indeed, she was not sure she should play a role. She had already overstepped significant boundaries by having a private conversation with a client. To do anything further would be to involve herself in matters that were not her business. But Margaret was different. Margaret was not a client. Margaret was a person in immediate danger. Danger not from anyone else, but from herself. And Emily had made a promise to Margaret that she would try to help within the span of 3 days. The question was, how? What could Emily possibly do to help Margaret escape from a marriage that by law and by custom had complete power over her? The answer, Emily feared, was nothing. There was simply no mechanism by which a woman in Margaret's position could escape. Divorce was extremely difficult and shameful. She had no money, no family support, no skills that would allow her to earn a living. She was, quite simply, trapped. Emily realized in that moment that she was in a position to understand Margaret's desperation in a way that few people could. Because Emily, too, had been trapped. She had been trapped in a marriage to a man who, while not cruel in the way that Margaret's husband was cruel, was still fundamentally unconcerned with her well-being or happiness. She had been trapped by law, by custom, by the expectations of society, and by her own belief that she had no right to escape. What had saved Emily was an accident. Her husband, Henry, had been a carpenter. He had been working on the renovation of a building when the structural beam had given way. He had been crushed beneath it and had died on the way to the hospital. Emily had been told that he had died instantly, but she suspected this was a kindness, and that his final moments had involved pain and fear. At the time, Emily had not known how to feel about this. She had mourned that was real. She had loved him in the way that one can love someone who causes you pain but is still fundamentally bound to you. But she had also felt, underneath the mourning, a terrible sense of relief. The trap had opened. She was free. That freedom had come at a cost. She had been left with very little money, and the world had not been kind to a young widow with a child to support. But at least she was free. And now 15 years later, she had a life that was hers, that she had built through her own effort, that did not require her to depend on any man. Emily realized that what she had experienced as a random tragedy, her husband's death, was also a kind of escape route that Margaret did not have available. Margaret could not wait for a random tragedy. Margaret was convinced after 7 months of abuse that her only escape was death by her own hand. And yet, as Emily sat in her chair that evening, she began to think about what might be possible. She began to think about the fact that there were people in the world, people with resources and knowledge, who might be able to help. She began to think about the fact that she herself, Emily, was not as powerless as she had always believed herself to be. The realization came to her slowly, almost against her will. She had spent 15 years making herself invisible, believing that her invisibility was a virtue, that by staying quiet and unobtrusive, she was fulfilling her purpose as a woman in the world. But what if invisibility was not a virtue?
What if, by choosing to stay silent, she was choosing to be complicit in the suffering of others? Emily did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed in the darkness and thought about David Stratton and Margaret Whitmore. She thought about Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan and the crime they had committed. She thought about all the people who had sat in those green chairs in the reception room and had kept their pain private because they had no reason to believe that anyone would listen or care. And she thought about the choice she had to make, whether to continue being invisible or whether to step into the light and do something that might make a difference. The next morning, Emily arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m., as always. But something had changed inside her, and she suspected that people might be able to see it if they looked closely enough. Mr. Foster arrived at 8:45 a.m., and Emily noticed immediately that his demeanor had changed. He was more agitated than usual. He kept looking at her, as though trying to determine something about what she knew or had observed. At one point, he actually approached her desk, something he rarely did. "Has Mr. Stratton been here this morning?" he asked. "No, sir," Emily said, and she was proud that her voice did not shake. "Did he arrive yesterday?" Mr. Foster asked, and his voice had taken on a harder edge. Emily realized that this was a moment that would determine a great deal about what came next. She could lie. She could say that they had discussed nothing. She could maintain her position as an invisible woman who had no involvement in the affairs of the men around her. Or she could tell the truth. "I did not discuss anything with him," Emily said carefully, "but I did observe that he seemed very distressed." Mr. Foster stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I would suggest that you not discuss anything about Mr. Stratton with anyone. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Emily said. He turned and walked away, but Emily understood in that moment that Mr. Foster now saw her as a threat. She had information, and she had shown through her conversation with David Stratton yesterday that she was willing to use that information. Over the next several hours, Emily's mind raced with possibilities and dangers. She understood that she was in a precarious position. She had witnessed a conversation about a serious crime. She was aware of an extortion scheme. If the men involved in that scheme felt threatened, they might decide to eliminate the threat, and Emily, a single woman without powerful friends, would be easy to discredit or dispose of. By the middle of the afternoon, Emily had made a decision. She was going to go to the police. Not today, not yet, because she needed to think through exactly what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. But she was going to go to the police and tell them what she knew about Mr. Foster, Mr. Brennan, and the embezzlement scheme that David Stratton had described to her. But before she could do that, something unexpected happened.
At 4:30 p.m., Mr. Hartwell, the owner of the office and Emily's boss for the past 5 years, asked her to come into his private office. This was extraordinary. In 5 years, Emily had never been invited into Mr. Hartwell's office. She knocked and entered and found Mr. Hartwell sitting behind his substantial desk, his expression grave. "Please sit, Miss Emily," he said. Emily sat in the chair across from him, her heart racing. "I have just received a visit from Mr. David Stratton," Mr. Hartwell said. "He has informed me of a very serious situation, a situation involving theft, embezzlement, and extortion. He has informed me that Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan have been involved in criminal activity and that they have been using this office as a base of operations." Emily's hands clenched in her lap. "However, Mr. Stratton also told me something else. He told me that he spoke with my receptionist yesterday and that he found comfort in speaking with someone who treated him as a human being rather than simply as a business transaction. He told me that your kindness and your apparent empathy were instrumental in his decision to come forward with the truth, rather than to give in to the threats that were being made against him." Emily did not know what to say.
Mr. Stratton has also informed me, Mr. Hartwell said, that he is going to the police this evening to file a formal complaint. He has assured me that when he does so, he will make it clear that this office and this company had no knowledge of the criminal activity being conducted by Foster and Brennan. However, he wanted me to know that you were aware of the situation and that you had conducted yourself with integrity. Emily found her voice. I did not do anything, sir, she said. I simply listened to what Mr. Stratton had to say. You did more than that, Mr. Hartwell said. You treated him as a person worthy of respect and attention. In my experience, Miss Emily, that is a rare thing in this world, and it is a thing that has value. Mr. Hartwell then told Emily what he had decided. He was immediately terminating the employment of Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan. He was going to the police himself to inform them of the criminal activity, and he was going to offer his full cooperation to any investigation that might result from Mr. Stratton's complaint. Furthermore, Mr. Hartwell said, I am increasing your salary by $2 per week, effective immediately. I'm doing this not only because you have shown integrity, but because I suspect that your role in encouraging Mr. Stratton to come forward may have protected this office and this company from much more serious consequences. If Mr. Stratton had simply disappeared, or if he had succumbed to the threats being made against him, the consequences for this company could have been catastrophic. Emily was too shocked to respond, but Mr. Hartwell was not finished. There is one more thing, he said. A young woman came to this office yesterday. She asked to see one of the agents, ostensibly to discuss a life insurance policy. However, the agent she was supposed to see was Mr. Foster. Mr. Stratton has informed me that he observed this young woman and he noticed certain signs that suggested she was in distress. He asked me if I knew who she was, and he expressed concern for her well-being. Emily's heart stopped. Mr. Stratton had noticed Margaret, and he had cared enough to mention her to Mr. Hartwell. Do you know who this young woman is? Mr. Hartwell asked. Her name is Margaret Whitmore, Emily said quietly, and yes, I am aware that she's in distress. What kind of distress? Emily hesitated. She was about to share information that was deeply private, deeply personal, but she realized that she had already crossed the line between visibility and invisibility. She might as well cross it completely. She is in an abusive marriage, Emily said. Her husband hurts her, and she came to the office yesterday because she wanted to take out a life insurance policy on herself with the intention of— Emily paused, choosing her words carefully, with the intention of ending her life and leaving the policy to her family. Mr. Hartwell's expression grew very serious. And what have you done about this? He asked. I asked her to give me 3 days, Emily said. I don't know what I can do to help her, but I didn't want her to give up without trying something first. Mr. Hartwell stood and walked to the window of his office, which looked out over Walnut Street below. He stood there in silence for a long moment. Then he turned back to Emily and said, Miss Emily, I am going to tell you something that I have never told anyone in this office and that I will ask you to keep in confidence. When I was a young man, before I became an insurance agent, I was married to a woman named Catherine. Catherine was an extraordinary woman, intelligent, kind, full of life. But her family was not kind to her, and she was trapped in a situation where she was deeply unhappy. One day, while I was away on business, Catherine took her own life. She took laudanum in large quantities, and she went to sleep and did not wake up. The police called it an accident, but I knew the truth. I had known for some time that she was unhappy, that she was suffering, and I had done nothing. I had convinced myself that it was not my place to interfere, that it was not my business to get involved in her private pain. Mr. Hartwell sat back down in his chair. That was 30 years ago, he said, and I have regretted every moment of that day, every moment of inaction, every moment of silence. When I built this business, I built it on the principle that I would never again be complicit in the suffering of someone who was in my sphere of awareness. That is why I pay fair wages. That is why I treat my employees with respect. And that is why, when you tell me about a young woman who is planning to end her life, I am going to ask you to help me do something about it." "What can we do?" Emily asked. "The law is not on her side. Her family has abandoned her. She has no resources of her own." "There are organizations," Mr. Hartwell said, "that exist to help women in situations like this. They are not well known, and they operate somewhat outside the bounds of mainstream society, but they exist, and they have helped many women escape situations like the one Margaret is in." Mr. Hartwell wrote down an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Emily. "Go there this evening. Ask for Dr. Elizabeth Hewitt. Dr. Hewitt runs a sanctuary for abused women. It is not an official institution. The law does not recognize it as having any special status, but it exists, and it has helped many women escape situations like the one Margaret is in." Mr. Hartwell wrote down an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Emily. "Go there this evening. Ask for Dr. Hewitt. Tell her that I sent you. She will understand, and she will be able to advise you on how to help this young woman." Emily took the paper with trembling hands. "Thank you, sir," she said. "Don't thank me," Mr. Hartwell said. "Just make sure that the next time a woman comes to you in pain, you do what I did not do 30 years ago. You take action."
Emily walked to the address that Mr. Hartwell had given her, a narrow building squeezed between a tailor shop and a closed storefront on a quiet street in South Philadelphia. The building looked ordinary from the outside, no sign, no indication of what it might contain. Emily almost walked past it twice. She knocked on the door. After a long moment, the door opened slightly, and an eye appeared in the gap, studying her carefully. "Yes?" a female voice said. "My name is Emily," she said. "I was sent by Mr. Hartwell, from Hartwell & Associates Insurance." The door opened wider, and Emily saw a woman of perhaps 60 years old, wearing practical clothing and spectacles. "Come in," the woman said. "Quickly, please." Emily entered, and the door closed behind her. The interior of the building was completely different from what she had expected. Instead of a medical office, it appeared to be a kind of residence. There was a sitting room with several comfortable chairs, and beyond that she could hear the sounds of people moving, of water being heated, of life being lived. "I am Dr. Elizabeth Hewitt," the woman said. "Mr. Hartwell has told me that you might visit. He called ahead. Now, tell me what brings you to my door at this hour." Emily told the story of Margaret, her marriage, her abuse, her desperation, her plan, and as she told the story, Dr. Hewitt's expression grew more and more serious. "This is not an uncommon situation," Dr. Hewitt said, when Emily had finished. "I have seen it dozens of times. The law provides no protection for women in abusive marriages. In fact, the law actively works against them. A wife is considered to be the property of her husband, and he has the right to treat that property as he sees fit. The church says she should stay and endure. Her family often says the same thing. She is completely trapped." "But you help them," Emily said. It was not a question. "We try," Dr. Hewitt said. "We provide shelter. We provide food. We provide safety, at least for a time. We help women find work if they are able to work. We put them in touch with other women who have escaped similar situations. It is not much, and it does not solve the fundamental problem, which is that women in this country have almost no legal rights, but it is something." "What would you need to help Margaret?" Emily asked. "First, I would need to meet with her. I would need to assess her situation and understand exactly what she is dealing with. Second, I would need to know if she is willing to leave her husband. Many women are not. They have been conditioned to believe that leaving is shameful, that they would rather die than face that shame. But if Margaret is willing to leave, we can help her." "I think she would leave if she could," Emily said. "But she doesn't believe she can." "Then you need to help her believe," Dr. Hewitt said. "You need to show her that there are options, that there are people who care about her well-being, that her life is not over simply because her marriage is a nightmare. Can you do that?"
I don't know, but I will try. Emily left Dr. Hewitt's sanctuary with a clear sense of purpose. She would bring Margaret there. She would introduce her to Dr. Hewitt and to whatever support network existed in that place. And she would help Margaret understand that she was not alone, that there were people who would stand with her in her choice to escape. But how to do this? How to convince Margaret to leave her husband and come to this strange sanctuary? How to overcome the years of conditioning that had taught Margaret that her only escape was death? Emily knew that she would have to act quickly. Margaret had given her 3 days. Today was the second day. By tomorrow evening, she would need to have made some progress, or Margaret would feel that she had given up, and she would return to her plans. That evening, Emily made a decision. She would use the only thing she had, the only power she possessed, which was her position in the office. The next morning, she would arrange for Margaret to come to the office. She would tell Margaret that there was someone she wanted her to meet, that there was help available, that her life did not have to end in tragedy.
The next morning was October 18, 1900. Emily arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m. as always, but this morning she was not alone. With her was a woman who appeared to be the housekeeper or maid of a respectable family. This woman, whose name was Sarah, had been one of Dr. Hewitt's first clients many years ago. She had escaped an abusive marriage, and now she worked as an advocate, helping other women escape similar situations. Emily had explained the situation to Sarah the evening before, and Sarah had agreed to come to the office and speak with Margaret if Emily could arrange it. "You must understand," Sarah had said to Emily, "that what you're doing is dangerous. If Margaret's husband discovers that she's considering leaving him, if he discovers that she has been in contact with people who are helping abused women, he may become violent. He may come after her. He may come after you." Emily had understood this. She had understood it, and she had decided to proceed anyway, because she had realized something profound in the past 2 days, that her invisibility, her careful neutrality, her refusal to be involved in other people's affairs had been a choice to be complicit in suffering. And she could not make that choice anymore. At 9 a.m., Emily called the number that Margaret had provided when she visited the office 2 days before. Margaret answered, and Emily told her that she had thought of a way to help her and that she wanted to see Margaret at the office at 10:30 a.m. before her shift ended. "I don't think that will help," Margaret said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I have already made my decision. I know what I'm going to do tonight." "Please," Emily said, "just come and talk to me. If, after you have heard what I have to say, you still want to go through with your plan, I will not stop you. But please give me this chance." There was a long silence. Then Margaret said, "All right, I will come." At 10:15 a.m., Margaret arrived at the office. She looked worse than she had 2 days before, if that was possible. The bruises on her wrists were now turning colors, purple and yellow, and there were new bruises on her neck that she had tried to conceal with her collar. Her eyes had the particular quality of someone who had already said goodbye to the world and was simply going through the motions of the last day. Emily stood and approached her. "I want you to meet someone," Emily said. "Her name is Sarah. Sarah was in a situation very similar to yours, and she is now free." Sarah stepped forward, and Margaret looked at her with something like fear. "What do you want from me?" Margaret asked. "Nothing," Sarah said. "I only want to tell you that what you are planning to do is not your only option. There are people who can help you. There is a place you can go where you will be safe. And there is a life waiting for you on the other side of this marriage, a life that is yours, that belongs only to you." Margaret began to cry. "You don't understand," she said. "I can't leave. My family won't help me. I have no money. I have nowhere to go. The law says I belong to my husband. There is no escape." "There is," Sarah said. She took Margaret's hand. "I know that it doesn't feel like it right now, but there is. Will you come with me? Will you come and see a place where other women like us are living, where we help each other, where we are safe?" Margaret looked at Emily, and then at Sarah, and then back to Emily. "If I leave my husband, I will be a scandal. My family will disown me completely. Society will reject me. My reputation will be destroyed."
Yes, Sarah said, all of that is true, but you will be alive, and you will be free. Is that not worth something? Emily watched as something shifted in Margaret's face. It was as though in that moment Margaret had made a choice between two terrible options, the certain death that she had planned, and the uncertain but possible life that Sarah was offering her. And she had chosen the uncertain life. All right, Margaret said quietly. I will go with you. Sarah and Margaret left the office together. Emily watched them go, and she felt something inside her chest release, a knot of tension that she had been holding for 3 days, since Margaret had first sat in the green chair and told her that she wanted to die. But the feeling of relief was short-lived, because as Sarah and Margaret were leaving, Mr. Brennan was arriving. He looked at them as they passed, and something in his face changed. He looked at Emily, and then at the space where Margaret and Sarah had been, and then back to Emily. "Who are those women?" he asked. "I don't know, sir," Emily said, and she was proud that her voice remained steady. "I think you do. I think you know exactly who they are, and I think that you, a simple receptionist who should mind her own business, decided to help her. Am I right?" Emily did not answer. "I am right," Mr. Brennan said, "and now I'm going to tell you something. That young woman is married to my brother, and my brother has paid me a significant sum of money to ensure that she stays in that marriage. Her family paid him to marry her so that he could control her money, the inheritance she is supposed to receive. If she leaves, that money disappears, and if my brother loses that money because of your interference, then there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" Emily understood. She understood that the situation was far more complicated than she had realized. She understood that Margaret was not simply a victim of an abusive husband, she was also a victim of a calculated scheme to steal her inheritance, and that by helping Margaret escape, she had made herself enemies of men who were willing to go to great lengths to protect their financial interests. "What will you do?" Emily asked. "I don't know yet, but I will do something. You can be sure of that." He turned and walked into his office, slamming the door behind him. Emily sat at her desk, and she realized that she had made a grave mistake. She had believed that she was acting heroically, that she was saving a life. But in doing so, she had put herself in danger. She had made an enemy of a man who had already proven that he was willing to break the law and to threaten people in order to get what he wanted.
That evening, as Emily walked home from the office, she became aware that she was being followed. She did not notice it immediately. She only became aware of it gradually, as she realized that the same man had been behind her for 3 blocks, maintaining a consistent distance. When she turned a corner, he turned the corner. When she stopped to look in a shop window, he stopped as well. Emily's heart began to race. She quickened her pace, walking faster and faster down the familiar streets toward her apartment. The man behind her also quickened his pace. When she reached her building, Emily fumbled with her keys, trying to get the door open quickly. The man behind her was now only a few feet away. She got the door open, rushed inside, and slammed it shut, locking it behind her. Through the glass, she saw the man stop on the street outside. He looked at her through the glass, and then he smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then he turned and walked away. Emily climbed the stairs to her apartment with shaking legs. She locked the door and sat in her chair by the window, watching the street below, terrified that she would see the man return. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her chair and thought about what she had done and what the consequences might be. The next morning, she was not sure if she should go to the office. She was not sure if she should go to the police. She was not sure of anything, except that she had made a terrible mistake by involving herself in affairs that were beyond her ability to manage or control. But she went to the office anyway, because if she didn't go, it would appear that she was frightened, and that would give Mr. Brennan power over her. When she arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m., she found that the situation had changed dramatically. Police officers were present in the office. Mr. Hartwell was speaking with one of the officers. Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan were nowhere to be seen.
Mr. Hartwell saw her and approached her immediately. "Come into my office," he said quietly. Emily followed him, her heart pounding. She closed the door behind them. "What has happened?" she asked. "David Stratton has filed a formal complaint with the police. The police have arrested Mr. Foster and Mr. Brennan. They've been taken into custody and are being charged with embezzlement and extortion." Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. The immediate threat was over. The men who had been threatening her, who had been following her, who had been involved in crimes, had been arrested and removed from the office. But Mr. Hartwell did not look relieved. He looked worried. "What's wrong?" Emily asked. "Mr. Brennan has made a statement to the police," Mr. Hartwell said. "In his statement, he has denied the embezzlement and extortion charges. Instead, he has accused you of theft." Emily's blood went cold. "What?" "He says that you have been stealing money from the office," Mr. Hartwell said. "He says that he has evidence of this theft. He is claiming that you have taken approximately $500 over the past year." "That's a lie," Emily said. "I have never stolen anything." "I know," Mr. Hartwell said. "I believe you, but that doesn't mean the police will believe you. Mr. Brennan is an educated man of apparent respectability. You are a woman. You're a receptionist. If it comes down to your word against his, I suspect the police will believe him." Emily sat down heavily in the chair across from Mr. Hartwell's desk. She had not anticipated this. She had naively believed that once she had done the right thing, once she had helped Margaret Whitmore escape, once she had supported David Stratton in coming forward with the truth, justice would somehow prevail. But now she realized how naive that belief had been. Men like Mr. Brennan did not simply accept defeat. They fought back. They used every tool available to them, including false accusations and lies. "What should I do?" Emily asked. "You have two options," Mr. Hartwell said. "The first option is to go to the police yourself and make a statement. You can tell them what Mr. Brennan said to you. You can tell them about Margaret Whitmore and what you discovered about the scheme to control her inheritance. You can lay out the evidence that Mr. Brennan is a man capable of extortion and of falsely accusing others. This might convince the police that he is lying about you." "And the second option?" Emily asked. "The second option," Mr. Hartwell said, "is to leave Philadelphia. You could take some money, I will give you enough to get you started, and you could go somewhere else, somewhere where Mr. Brennan cannot find you. You could begin a new life under a new name if necessary. You would escape the accusations. You would be safe." Emily sat in silence for a long moment. She understood that both of these options were, in a real sense, ways of destroying her life. If she went to the police and spoke against Mr. Brennan, she would become public, visible, notorious. The story would become known in Philadelphia society. She would be marked as a woman who had gotten involved in a scandal. Even if she was not convicted of the theft charges, her reputation would be destroyed. No respectable business would hire her. She would be alone, even more alone than she was now. But if she ran, if she left Philadelphia and tried to begin a new life elsewhere, she would also be alone. And she would be living in fear, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering if Mr. Brennan would find her. "There is a third option," Mr. Hartwell said quietly, "though it is a dangerous one." "What is it?" Emily asked. "You could help the police build a case against Mr. Brennan. You could tell them everything he has said to you. You can confirm the story that David Stratton has told them. You can provide them with the evidence of the scheme to control Margaret Whitmore's inheritance. And in doing so, you could help ensure that Mr. Brennan is convicted not only of embezzlement and extortion, but of attempted perjury, of falsely accusing you of theft, as a way to discredit your testimony." "But that would require me to testify. In public, in court, in front of everyone in Philadelphia. It would require me to be completely visible, completely exposed." "Yes," Mr. Hartwell said, "it would." Emily stood and walked to the window of Mr. Hartwell's office. She looked out on the street below, at the people passing by, at the normal rhythm of life in Philadelphia. She thought about what it would mean to step out of her invisibility, to make her presence known, to insist that her words and her observations mattered. "I will do it. I will testify."
The trial took place in November 1900.
exactly 1 month after Emily first noticed the trembling in David Stratton's hands. The courtroom was packed with people. Journalists, curious citizens, people who were interested in the scandal of corruption in the insurance business. Emily sat in the witness stand and swore to tell the truth. And then she told her story. She described how David Stratton had come to her with his confession about the embezzlement and extortion. She described how Mr. Brennan had approached her after Margaret had left the office, and how he had explained the scheme to control Margaret's inheritance. She described how she had been followed, how she had been threatened. The defense attorney tried to discredit her. He asked her why she, a simple receptionist, should be believed over a man of Mr. Brennan's apparent standing. He asked her if she had been motivated by personal feelings toward David Stratton or Margaret Whitmore. He asked her if she had any reason to lie. But Emily answered every question calmly and truthfully. And when it was over, she had done what she came to do. She had made her invisible existence visible. She had insisted that her words mattered. David Stratton also testified. He described the embezzlement scheme, the extortion, the threats that had been made against him. He described how Emily had shown him kindness when he was desperate, and how that kindness had given him the courage to come forward with the truth. Margaret Whitmore also testified, though she was terrified to do so. She described her marriage, her abuse, her plans to end her life. She described how Emily had offered her an alternative and how Emily had helped her find safety. And then finally, the verdict came. Mr. Brennan and Mr. Foster were found guilty of embezzlement and extortion. They were sentenced to 5 years in prison. Mr. Brennan was also found guilty of perjury for falsely accusing Emily of theft. Emily walked out of the courthouse into the Philadelphia sunshine, and she was no longer invisible. The weeks following the trial were in many ways harder than the weeks before it. Emily had become a public figure, the woman who had exposed the conspiracy in the insurance business, the woman who had refused to stay silent. Newspapers ran articles about her. Some articles were sympathetic, celebrating her courage and her moral clarity. Other articles were harsh, questioning her motives, suggesting that she had involved herself in matters that were not her concern, that she had overstepped the boundaries of her position. Emily's co-workers treated her differently, some with respect, some with resentment, many with a combination of both. Mr. Hartwell offered her a promotion to head clerk, managing other office workers, but Emily declined. She did not want a promotion. She only wanted to continue her work as a receptionist, but now as someone who was no longer invisible, as someone who had claimed the right to be seen and heard. Thomas, her son, came to visit her after the trial. He brought his wife, a gentle young woman named Catherine, whom he had recently married. Thomas read all the newspaper articles about his mother. When he saw her, he embraced her, and he said, "I'm proud of you, Mother. I know that was hard." Emily had cried at that moment because her son, whom she had tried so hard not to burden with the complications of her life, had chosen to see her as worthy of pride. The fate of David Stratton and Margaret Whitmore diverged in interesting ways. David Stratton's confession about his involvement in the embezzlement scheme could have resulted in criminal charges against him, but the district attorney decided not to prosecute. He determined that Stratton had been a victim of extortion, and that he had come forward voluntarily to expose the crime. David's business did not recover from the financial loss. He sold the mills to a larger company, took a significant loss, but managed to keep enough to live modestly. He did not become wealthy again, but he regained his dignity. Margaret Whitmore lived at Dr. Hewitt's sanctuary for 6 months. In that time, she learned bookkeeping and secretarial skills. She eventually found work as a secretary at a small publishing house. Her family never forgave her for leaving her husband, but she did not need their forgiveness. She had her own life, her own income, her own autonomy. She was free. In the spring of 1901, 6 months after the trial, Emily received a visitor at her apartment. It was Margaret. She had come to thank Emily one final time and to tell her that she was leaving Philadelphia to take a new position at a publishing house in Boston. Margaret was wearing a new dress, one that she had chosen and purchased herself. She looked like a different person from the woman who had sat in the green chair and spoken of ending her life. "I wanted to see you one more time before I left. I wanted to tell you that if it had not been for you, I would not be standing here. I would not be alive." "You would have found another way," Emily said. "Dr. Hewitt would have helped you eventually." "Perhaps," Margaret said, "but I would not have lived long enough for that to matter. I was decided. I was resolved. It was only because you stopped me, because you gave me a reason to believe that there was another option, that I am here now." Emily embraced Margaret, and they stood together in Emily's small apartment, two women who had found each other in darkness and had chosen to step into the light together. After Margaret left, Emily sat in her chair by the window, as she had done so many times before. But now as she looked out at the street, she saw the world differently. She saw it not as a series of abstract observations, but as a living landscape filled with people who were struggling and suffering, people who needed to be seen and heard. She thought about David Stratton, who had rebuilt his life with humility and integrity. She thought about Margaret Whitmore, who was beginning a new life in a new city, free from the constraints that had nearly destroyed her. She thought about Mr. Hartwell, who had chosen to honor the memory of his dead wife by helping other women escape situations similar to hers. And she thought about herself, Emily, who had chosen to break her silence and had discovered that invisibility was not a virtue. It was a form of complicity. The cost of stepping into visibility had been high. Emily's reputation in Philadelphia society was permanently altered. She would never be a fully respectable woman again, in the eyes of many people. There would always be those who saw her as someone who had overstepped, who had involved herself in matters that were not her concern. But there would also be those who saw her as someone who had been brave enough to speak the truth. There would be women who heard about what she had done and who found courage in her example. There would be people who understood that sometimes being truly human meant refusing to be invisible, refusing to be complicit in suffering, refusing to accept that one person cannot make a difference.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.